The Holy Gospel this morning is found in St. Matthew, the 16th chapter. Well, then Jesus said to his disciples, I'm going to start up here. From that time on, Jesus began to show his disciples that he must go to Jerusalem and undergo great suffering at the hands of the elders and chief priests and scribes and be killed, and on the third day be raised. And Peter took him aside and began to rebuke him, saying, God forbid it, Lord, this must never happen to you. But Jesus turned and said to Peter, Get behind me, Satan. You're a stumbling block to me, for you're setting your mind not on divine things, but on human things. And then Jesus told his disciples, If any want to become my followers, let them deny themselves and take up their cross and follow me. For those who want to save their life will lose it, and those who lose their life for my sake will find it. For what will it profit them if they gain the whole world, but forfeit their life? Or what will they give in return for their life? The gospel of our Lord. You may be seated. Now, this took place quite a long time ago. And it involves a man by the name of Charles Colson. Now, for those of you who are old or history buffs, you may remember that he was famous for being a criminal in a presidential administration back in the 70s and was convicted of his crimes and went to prison for what we call Watergate. But in prison, Charles Colson had a change of heart and began a ministry to prison inmates and on their release. And it became a quite effective and a successful ministry, so much so that it's still in effect today as one of the great Christian prison ministries in our country. So back while we were in seminary in Chicago, he was awarded the Templeton Prize in Religion for his work upon leaving prison and continuing with this prison ministry that he had started there. And the Templeton Prize was, for religion, is actually a pretty big deal. You get about $1 million, which most people who are in the religion world never see that kind of money. So there was going to be a big presentation of the award to Mr. Colson at Rockefeller Chapel at the University of Chicago. Now, Rockefeller Chapel is a huge chapel there at the university. It is funded by, as the name implies, John D. Rockefeller. He gave the money to build this place. It seats about 1,200 people. It is just mammoth little chapel. And Mr. Colson was going to give his Templeton address there. And so Chris and I and a couple of folks, friends of ours from seminary, decided, since that was right down the street from where we lived, that we would go listen to him speak. And so we listened to Mr. Colson talk about his time, his trials as he went through the Watergate experience, and then as he began his prison ministry in prison and then afterwards. And it was a very, very challenging speech about how we live in our world and what we do with people who are incarcerated and how we behave and live after they have been released from prison. But one thing that I most remember about that night more than anything else was that it was ridiculously hot. I mean, it was early spring, and so the air conditioners hadn't been set yet, and it was just stifling. 1,200 people breathing and hanging around in this big old concrete chapel just could not find any air movement, and I was just about at the point of passing out. And so as the lecture ended and as people were gathering around, I told Chris, I said, I have just got to go out and get some fresh air. And she said that was fine. They were just going to hang around, and she'd find me later. And so I was looking to find a quick exit, but with 1,200 people, everybody's leaving. And then there's one of those exit doors that, it's like right here by the chancel area that is the big bar and says "Do not use," and if you do, the alarm will sound. You've all seen those kind of things. And so that looked like it was off, but I saw like somebody go through that door, and I didn't hear the alarm. So I was like, oh, they're just tricking us. They don't really want us to use that door, so they put the bar alarm there so that we don't use it, even though the alarm's not set. So since I was really close to it, I just buzzed through the door. And of course, the alarm didn't go off, and as I opened up the door and stepped outside, I almost ran over the guy who had gone out in front of me. And And okay, he was a little guy. I mean, you know, he's like this tall. And but he was a Roman Catholic priest. The Roman Catholic priests wore black cassocks a lot in Chicago in those days, so he had a cassock on. But what was even worse than having that big, heavy cassock in this heat, he had on a scarlet cowl and cape that he was wearing, and he had on a little scarlet hat. And I thought to myself, my gosh, if I'm sweating in a t-shirt and shorts, imagine what this poor little guy's feeling like. And so he's just trying to get some air as well. But I almost ran over him, and so I do the old, oh, excuse me, and he says, oh, sorry, and then we turn and we face each other, and it is Joseph Cardinal Bernardin, the Cardinal of the Chicago Diocese. Now, at that time, 1987, there were only 100 cardinals in the world. He was one of the 100 most important Roman Catholic people in the world. And in fact, for our country at that time, he was one of the most important Roman Catholics in the entire United States of America. And here was this guy just standing there, and just like me, we were both trying to get out of the heat. And, well, as you know, many of you know me by now, I'm not going to not say anything. I'm going to say something, and it's probably going to be wildly inappropriate or at least a little, shouldn't have probably said that type thing. So I was a little stammering and whatnot, and I just said, well, that was a challenging talk. And the cardinal, he looked up at me and he said, it's a challenging world, son. It's a challenging world. Now, at the time, I wasn't even 30 years old. But I knew in my heart of hearts that it was a challenging world. And before I could say anything in response to this, all of a sudden, this huge black SUV came screeching up to a halt in the street in front of us. And all these Roman Catholic priests came running from around the bushes and corners and stuff like that, saying, Your Eminence, we're here, don't worry. And they all looked at me, and they were giving me the up and down as if they thought they should be worried about me. But, I mean, seriously, how much trouble can a Lutheran theologian present to a Catholic? And so they just realized I was kind of an ineffectual little guy, and they just let me go. And then they said, they nodded their heads and recognized me, and they whisked the cardinal into his limousine, and away they went. And there I was standing all by myself, knowing that it was a challenging world. And indeed, as we look at our world today, the challenges seem even greater 30 years later. I mean, Hurricane Harvey. Just a massive hurricane. Puts out 300,000 people. Affects a city of over 6 million. And the loss and devastation we can't even imagine. Wow. But you want to know something? At the same time Hurricane Harvey was hitting the Texas-Louisiana coast, there was a tropical storm in northeast India, in Bihar, exact same time. And from that tropical storm, I'm going to give you the number of homeless people out of that tropical storm, estimated right now at 12 million. 12 million people in India right now are homeless. That's twice the size of Houston. Think of that. There's 12 million people in India right now that don't have a home. There's another 500,000 people down in Houston, Louisiana, that don't even know where they're going to go. We've had so many wildfires that most of the eastern part of Montana has burned to the ground this summer. They've had 957 fires they've had to put out. Our world is a challenging world. And amongst all these other things that are happening on a global or cosmic scale, what about the own challenges that are in our lives? What are the things that make it difficult for us to go day by day? Sometimes our bodies fail us and they don't work like they used to. That's a challenge. And what about all the people who refuse to call or remember that we're related? And that's a challenge. And what about all the stress and the worry we have for the people that we love and how they're going to make it and what they're going to do and how we can be part of their life? And that's a challenge. I mean, the challenges, they mount up to the point where it becomes overwhelming. It is a challenging world, as the Cardinal told me years ago. And of course, our instincts are either fight back or run away. And that's, of course, precisely what happened to Peter that day. When Jesus was telling the disciples that it's going to be challenging going forward, that he's going to be put to death and that people are going to lie about him, Peter's instinct was to fight. No, Lord, not going to happen. Not on my watch. And Jesus says, no, Peter. That's not how you face challenging times. Get behind me. You're not doing any better than Satan. You don't face challenging times by bucking it up and, trying to beat them and show them that you can take that evil and make it worse, or you can do something else that'll conquer it and you'll win and you'll be on top and woo, bully for you. He says, Jesus looked at Peter and said, if you're going to do that, you just get behind me. You're no better than Satan. I'd rather have Satan as my friend than you. It's not how you deal with challenging times. And he tells Peter, he says, Peter, you've set your mind on human stuff. You forgot about the divine stuff. Because you see, what happens in the challenging times is that it's our idea to kind of focus on the human things and to focus on the ways in which we can either run away or fight. And so we get caught up in all the human stuff, the tragedy, the loss, the hopelessness, the despair, the crick in our back, the resentment in our hearts, the anger on our lips. And we forget about the divine things, the love and the compassion, about all the people who have run to India or Houston to help, to provide a dry patch of land or a bottle of water. We forget about the divine things, about how love is part of God's whole process in this world, and that peace and hope are what God has brought from us and for us in spite of all the challenges that remain. And we so focus on the human things that we lose track of the divine things. So when Jesus says, take up your cross and follow me, he's not saying take up all the human stuff of your life, all the people who don't listen to you, relatives who don't call, people who make promises they don't intend to keep, and all that other stuff. But rather to take up the cross itself, the story of God's final victory over death, the story of God's undying love even in the face of persecution, hatred, and challenge. Pick up the cross and follow Jesus Christ with the hope and the promise that God has for each and every one of us. That we live and grow and move in the presence of God's undying grace. Because this is such a challenging world. That is a challenging word. Because there are so many things that we want to be able to do. There's so many things it seems like we should do. We have so much. Others have so little. We're healthy. Someone is not. Our children are alive. Some people's children are not. I mean, there's just all kinds of stuff that makes it seem like we're in charge. Human thing. To stay focused on the divine things is to not become a stumbling block to what God is doing in the world. Is not to become like Satan and find a way to get in the path, but rather is to be able to open up to a life that God has created for all of humanity, all of the world. And yes, there are challenges. And yes, there are tragedies. And yes, we will respond. Yes, because some of us do have some, we will be able to give. Yes, because our people are friendly and healthy and whole, we will be able to share. But it's precisely in focusing on those gifts of God, that we combat the challenges of life. To reach across that pew and give someone a hug or shake their hand. To walk out into that narthex and share a joy and a smile. To be able to go out into the streets and be able to be a positive force of life and hope. These are the God things. These are the divine things that Jesus would have us focus on in the times of challenge. And we rise to this occasion not because we've somehow mastered the ability to do so, but because we trust implicitly that when the challenges come to us, God will meet them. God will send the people into our lives to fill our lives with grace and hope, with peace and love. Christianity is designed. Christianity lives amidst the challenges of this world. And as the Cardinal reminded me a long time ago, it is a challenging place. But as the one whom both the Cardinal and I follow, it is finally the divine thing, the cross, and its hope, and its promise that you, me, us will never die, but live forever in God.